All right, let us go to Patrick in Allentown, Pennsylvania. Welcome to the Line of Fire.
Good afternoon, Dr. Brown. God bless you.
God bless.
I just a quick comment now to the question. In the Talmud, I've heard that there's a rabbi, I don't remember his name, was complaining that around the same year that Christ was resurrected, the sacrifice in the temple was no longer accepted by God all the way until the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. Number one, is that correct? And if it is, how do the rabbis of today handle that?
Right. So it's you're mixing a couple of concepts, but here is what's accurate. I'll go ahead and explain it. The tractate Yoma, which means the day, dealing with the Day of Atonement, it deals with the customs surrounding the Day of Atonement and what happened with the high priest and how the sacrifices were offered, just all of the details. And because the high priest, it was critical that he was able to function that day, that he would be separated from wife, other relatives, lest somebody would die and your body falls on you accidentally, or touch it accidentally, you're defiled, you can't participate, and just, all of the other regulations and how he prepares for that day. And we know that on the Day of Atonement, there were two goats involved. There was the goat in Hebrew, La'azazel, which is normally translated as scapegoat, based on it escaped out into the wilderness. And then there was the goat that was sacrificed, and his blood was brought into the holiest place for atonement. So according to the traditions that developed later, that two lots were put in an urn, one for the Lord, one for Azazel, and the priest would reach in and take them out. If he reached in and took the one that said for the Lord with his right hand, that was a good sign that the sacrifice would be accepted. If he grabbed it with his left hand, bad sign. Okay, so there are three signs. We'll come back to them, and then I'll tell you how this ties in with the time of the death of Jesus. Stay right here. In Tractate Yoma 39a and b, so in the normal edition of the Talmud, front side of the page, back side of the page, it said that there were three different signs by which the high priest would know, and the people would know, whether the sacrifices on the Day of Atonement were accepted or not. The first would be, or one of the three, when the priest would reach into the urn to take out the two lots, one with his right hand, one with his left, that if the lot in the right hand came out for the Lord, that's the goat to be sacrificed in the tabernacle / temple, that was a good sign. If he pulled that one in the left hand, bad sign. Okay. Next would be that you had the candle stand, and you would start lighting it from the westmost candle over. If that one was still burning, so you've got oil, if the first one that you lit is the last one to go out, that was another sign that God had accepted the sacrifices. And then the third sign was that there would be a scarlet thread that was tied to the horn of the goat that would be sent out into the wilderness, and or to the front doors of the temple. And if that scarlet thread turned white, that was a sign that sins were forgiven, as per Isaiah 1:18, though your sins be scarlet, I'll make them white as snow. Okay, so the tradition says that sometime before the days of Jesus, Shimon HaTzadik, Simeon the Righteous, could be 2nd, 3rd century BC, that the entire 40 years that he served as the high priest, all three signs came up positive every time. And by the way, the tradition developed by the time of Jesus that goat, instead of sending it to the wilderness, they'd drive it off a cliff, and it would perish that way. In any case, the tradition says that those 40 years that he was the high priest, the sacrifices were always accepted, obviously because of his righteous intercession. But after that, some years yes, some years no. When it was yes, the people would rejoice. When it was no, there was a sense of shame and pain, and since not forgiven, what's wrong? Then it says this: the last 40 years before the temple was destroyed, So what year is the temple destroyed? The year 70. What year does Messiah die and rise? There's debate between scholars between 30, 33. 30 has always seemed to be the right date to me based on other data. All right. Even the 40-year period doesn't have to be taken as exact 40 years, but if it is exact 40 years, it's from 30 to 70. Okay. It says that the last 40 years, the exact opposite of Shimon HaTzadik, Simeon the Righteous, the exact opposite, the last 40 years before the temple was destroyed, none of those three signs came up positive. All three came up negative every time. The lot for the Lord was in the left hand versus the right hand. The lot for Azazel, for the goat to be sent into the wilderness, that was in the right hand. The westernmost candle, instead of going out last, would just go out normally. And the scarlet thread on the temple doors and or on the goat's horn would not turn white. It would remain red. And the people would see this and recognize their sins weren't forgiven. So, Patrick, this is something that I have laid out for many, many years as an indication, even within rabbinic literature. It states Tanu Rabbanan, which is that, you know, our rabbis, our sages taught. So this is a tradition that's been passed on and that within the text is not disputed. That is a hidden confirmation that at that point God said, no more. I've provided a better way. No more. You've rejected the Messiah, so I'm not going to accept your sacrifices. Now, to be totally candid, traditional rabbis really take issue with me for doing that. They feel I'm using their sacred texts to prove my homiletical point. They feel it's not fair to the text that I'm reading something into it, and I don't accept other historical aspects of the Talmud. Why should I accept that? I understand their argument, and I understand it feels to them like I'm tampering with something sacred. I'm simply coming up with a logical deduction. Isn't that striking? People say, is there any indication in rabbinic literature, you know, and any proof? Or, well, that's something that gets my attention, that I could ask a traditional Jew, why do you think that is? And could it be, if that's when the Messiah died and rose, that on two levels, God's saying no more to your sacrifices, no more because you've rejected the Messiah, why should I accept your sacrifices? And no more because I have provided a better way. So, what do the rabbis say in response? Well, they say that instead of the sacrifices, we have prayer, we have other means that God already gave in the Old Testament in anticipation of the fact that we wouldn't have the sacrificial system, and sacrifices were always secondary to repentance. Those are arguments they give, but of course, all of them have very easy answers and responses. So, Patrick, I appreciate the call. So again, in the tractate Yoma, in the Babylonian Talmud, 39a-b, you get that full account. You say, hey, where could I find that? Well, let's do it together. All right, so Chris, if you're ready, I'm going to do this on my screen. We go to the Sefaria website, Sefaria. It is a treasure trove of Jewish literature. As it says, a living library of Jewish texts. Then we click on where it gives us the option with text, Tanakh, so that's the Hebrew Bible, Mishnah, foundational Jewish legal documents and statements for around 200 years after Jesus. Then Talmud, so we click on Talmud, and then we go back down to Seder Moed, which is the order. The Mishnah is divided into 6 orders. We go down to the order of sacred days, the appointed times. We click on Yoma, and then when we see it on the screen, we go to Yoma and scroll down to chapter 3, which is 39a, or actually chapter 4. We'll start there. And there it's going to take us through the text with Hebrew, and then English translation, the Steinschaltz expanded translation. And then after that, it goes from Hebrew into more of an Aramaic. So let's scroll down there a little, Chris. It starts with the statements in the Mishnah. And let's keep scrolling down on our screen until we get to what's called Gemara. And there we go. Gemara, so if you're reading in Hebrew, it's a big G and a big M, big Gimel, big Mem. Gemara, Lamali Taraf Makalpi. Why do I need the high priest to have mixed the lots in a receptacle before he draws the lots, etc.? So what's interesting is in an expanded translation, I am going to read first the translation here from Rabbi Adin Steinschaltz, one of the great Jewish geniuses of this generation, recently deceased. Why? So I'm going to read the whole thing. All right, this is this paragraph. Why do I need the high priest to have mixed the lots in a receptacle before he draws the lots? In order that he not be able to intentionally take the lot for God specifically with his right hand, since it is a fortuitous omen for the lot for God to arise in his right hand, there is a concern that he might force the result in contravention of the requirements that the designation of the goats be made through a random lottery. All right, that's his expanded translation. What does the Aramaic actually say? He has that in bold. Why do I mixed in order that he not, why do I mixed a receptacle in order that he not intentionally take? That's how concisely written it is in Aramaic. And that's how much it assumes a larger familiarity with the subject matter or someone teaching you. Now the teachers are doing this in written form. So in any case, we can take that off the screen for those watching. But if you ever want to look up a text and get traditional Jewish understanding, now many of these are still not translated into English, so it won't help you unless you can read Hebrew or Aramaic. But many have been translated. It's a tremendous treasure trove, a great place to see what Jewish people believe in their own words, see the text for yourself. But before you try to really wrap your mind around what Talmud's saying, a lot of the arguments are complex. Many times you'll have 4, 5, 10, 20 varied opinions, then bringing in other subjects, tying things in with other verses, and it can be very confusing and difficult. And then you can pull something out and say, well, the Talmud says this, and that's an inaccurate statement. In my book, Christian Anti-Semitism, which came out in February, and thankfully people are feeling the impact of that, I have a whole chapter called The Truth About the Talmud. In my book, Christian Anti-Semitism, The Truth About the Talmud. And there I explain that there are a lot of misunderstandings and misconceptions about the Talmud. Do I accept the Talmud as authoritative? Of course not. I'm not a traditional Jew. Do I accept it as inspired in a unique and supernatural way? No. If I did, I'd be a traditional Jew. Do I find much beauty and wisdom in it? Yes. Do I find much legalism and convoluted legal discussion? Yes. Do I find some disturbing traditions? Yes. It's a massive work, mixed in many ways, but let's be fair with it as we use it. All right, friends, special broadcast coming your way tomorrow where we're going to answer your Bible translation questions. Be blessed.